This week on Christian World News, Ukraine on the brink. As fighting erupts in disputed territories, more than 100,000 Russian troops are ready for invasion. Plus, free speech and freedoms of religion under fire in Finland. Why this Christian member of parliament was tried for hate speech, simply for posting passages from the Bible. And uncovering the oldest black church in America. How the recovery of the First Baptist Church in Virginia is bringing blacks and whites together. Welcome to Christian World News. I'm Gary Lane. Well, the U.S. is warning a Russian invasion of Ukraine is imminent. While bracing for the worst, Ukrainians are responding boldly to Russia's rising aggression. Brody Carter brings our coverage on the latest warning about war in Europe.
As more Russian troops amass at Ukraine's border, threats of war have led to very real scenarios of what could happen if diplomacy fails. First, Russia uses a fake reason to launch an attack, sometimes called a false flag, and that leads to war in Ukraine.
We have reason to believe that they are engaged in a false flag operation to have an excuse to go in.
State Secretary Antony Blinken told the UN Security Council how a Russian invasion could begin.
Russian missiles and bombs will drop across Ukraine. Communications will be jammed. Cyber attacks will shut down key Ukrainian institutions.
Blinken added more specific details of how the attack would be carried out.
We have information that indicates Russia will target specific groups of Ukrainians. After that, Russian tanks and soldiers will advance on key targets that have already been identified.
Blinken said Russia could also use drone strikes and chemical warfare. And today, with tensions high, Russia announced massive drills of its nuclear forces. Thursday, NATO's Secretary General warned how dangerous a war could be.
We have seen also Iskander missiles in Belarus. And Iskander missiles are dual-capable missiles that can also carry nuclear warheads.
This is the exact kind of crisis that the United Nations, and specifically this Security Council, was created to prevent.
Russia argued that any attempts to place the blame on Russia are futile and blameless. Blinken said he was not at the UN to start a war, but to prevent one.
We are laying it out in great detail, with the hope that by sharing what we know with the world, we can influence Russia to abandon the path of war and choose a different path while there's still time.
In Ukraine itself, support for joining NATO, the very thing Vladimir Putin doesn't want, is now at an all-time high. For a look at the reaction from Ukrainians to the threat of an invasion, here's CBN's George Thomas from the city of Lviv in Ukraine.
In 2014, when Russian-backed separatists invaded eastern Ukraine, thousands of folks fled west to cities like Lviv. And today, with the threat of another Russian invasion, authorities here and across western Ukraine are bracing for 5 million refugees. We've seen the images the past few weeks. Russia adding forces and military hardware, inching ever so close to surrounding their neighbor, while Ukrainians holding almost daily drills ready to defend their country. And yet, an image you've not likely seen. Ukrainian Christians deploying their own weapon, a shield of prayer and worship.
People are worried, but we encourage them to look to Jesus with all of our might, because it's only through prayer that we can keep peace in our country.
70% of Pastor Dimitri's congregation is from eastern Ukraine, many of them escaping ongoing violence there.
My heart right now is with my relatives I left behind in Donetsk, my mom, my sister, and my grandmother, but they cannot leave this territory, and it breaks me.
Foreign embassies, including the United States, moving staff here to Lviv, near the Polish border. And just as that's happening, in a small upper room near Lviv's city center, Christians from across Africa praying for their host country, ready to be hands and feet of Jesus to those who may have to flee.
As Christians and as people of God, it's our job and it's our duty to pray for the whole world. because the Lord wants peace.
On the other side of town, area pastors met Sunday night for a time of planning and prayer, many telling CBN News what's at stake for their country.
This is ultimately a fight for freedom.
Valery Marchenko's brother pastors a church in an eastern area occupied by Russian separatists.
They're forbidden from having church meetings together, but they still do it secretly. And I think this is what will happen if Russia invades. But the truth is that it is impossible to stop the Church of Jesus Christ.
And it's that church here in Lviv that's continuing to preach hope and peace in the midst of uncertainty.
And George joins us now from Lviv, Ukraine. George, the conflict in eastern Ukraine is heating up. Explain for our viewers what's happening there, and are we seeing the flashpoint?
Yeah, we absolutely are, Gary. You know, this entire time, Ukrainians have been asking, what is the reason that Russia wants to invade us? What is what have we done wrong? And the United States, Great Britain, and NATO have been accusing Russia of throwing up these false flags, create a situation to, in essence, give them legitimacy, give them the right to go into Ukraine. And we're seeing that right now play out as we speak in the eastern part of the country. This idea that ethnic Russians, Moscow accuses Ukrainians of targeting ethnic Russians in the region. We saw this, Gary, back in 2008 when they were just about to invade Georgia. We saw this 8 years ago in 2014 when Russia was about to invade eastern Ukraine. They used this false flag, this idea that ethnic Russians are under assault, are experiencing widespread human rights abuses. Obviously, the Ukrainian government today, all this week, has been pushing back that is totally false.
Yes, George, it is a little deja vu here from 2008, reminiscent of 2008. So this time, what does Vladimir Putin really want?
I mean, that's what everybody's trying to figure out. You know, I mean, he's obviously with about 190,000 troops amassed on the border. There's a real sense, especially in the West, that he is ready to pounce on Ukraine. Many Ukrainians, I've spent the last week and a half here, many Ukrainians just can't believe this. They say we've been dealing and living under war for the last 8 years. But clearly what is different is the number of troops deployed as opposed to 8 years ago. And obviously, you know, there is some concern because most of the Ukrainian forces are in the eastern part of the country. And we already know from the maps that we have been seeing all throughout these last few weeks in the build-up to where we are today, Russian forces now continue. They're up in the northeastern part of the country, to the northwestern part of the country, where Ukrainians are in some ways vulnerable to a full-scale invasion, coupled with what's going on in Belarus. So, in essence, you know, the aspirations of Vladimir Putin is that he sees Ukraine as part of the Russian orbit. He believes that Russians and Ukrainians are one people, one language, one country. Obviously, Ukrainians are very much opposed to that idea.
And I know you've been talking with Christians and church leaders there, so how will they respond if there is an invasion, George?
I was talking just before coming on the show today with a contact in Mariupol who has spent the last 8 years with his community, with his children, with his church, digging trenches. I texted him this evening saying, what's going on? What's the mood? He says, we are cleaning the trenches, we are cleaning our weapons, and we are praying. Obviously, we all know Ukrainians are going to defend their nation whatever comes. They are fully engaged to continue to defend their country and to continue enjoy the freedoms that they have had all these many years.
Okay, George, I know a lot of our viewers are praying for you. Stay safe, my brother. Thank you for that report.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Coming up, the Bible on trial. Why this lawmaker in Finland is facing fines and possible prison, all for posting scripture verses to social media. Well, welcome back. In Finland, a Christian member of parliament is fighting for freedom of speech and religion. Päivi Räsänen was tried on 3 counts of hate speech after posting to social media an image of a Bible passage condemning homosexuality. Prosecutors said it violated the equality and dignity of homosexuals. Räsänen defended the 2019 post, saying it was a challenge to the Evangelical Lutheran Church's affiliation with the Helsinki Gay Pride event, not a criticism of people who are living a homosexual lifestyle. Räsänen told FaithWire's Billy Hollowell that the court's decision could have dire consequences for all believers in her country.
Does Finland have free speech? I mean,
Yes.
Here in America, we would talk about the First Amendment. What are the laws that would enable this sort of treatment to you after merely sharing your perspective on something?
Yes, this is a very good question because we are in Finland proud of the rule of law and of our legislation because we have our constitution that guarantees the freedom of speech and religion. So it has been a shock to many, many thousands of Christians that this happens in Finland. And this is a very historical case in Finland. Never before has happened something like this. Because I have not spoken anything about hatred against any minority. I have spoken those things that represent a very classical interpretation of the Bible and churches, what Christians have been teaching hundreds of years. So this has been very surprising to us. But I think that this is also alarming for other European countries, that if this happens in a democracy as Finland, it can happen anywhere. And I have to say that it was very absurd situation to sit there on the police station. I was sitting there with my Bible on the table, and the police asked that, what does the word sin mean? What does the Apostle Paul mean in the letter of the Romans, and what is the whole message of the letter of the Romans? That kind of questions that about my belief and my conviction. So I felt like sitting in Soviet time.
The court's decision will come at the end of March. Now, she could be fined and possibly sentenced to up to 2 years in prison if convicted. More than 14,000 people have signed a petition pledging to pray for her. Well, the Olympic Games have brought international criticism of China's human rights. Still, the communist government considers the Games a great success. Dale Hurd explains why.
While some labeled the 2022 Winter Olympics the Genocide Games, the event will be remembered as a propaganda victory, as China's government sought to portray one of the world's worst dictatorships as a normal nation. Still, there were moments, like when a news reporter from Dutch TV was suddenly strong-armed by a Chinese security guard in the middle of a live report. And when videos posted by a Finnish skier of water pouring out of the ceiling and electrical outlets in her Olympic Village apartment went viral, Chinese officials ordered her to delete the post.
The Olympics are supposed to be a celebration of the human spirit. That's not what this Winter Olympics was about. This Winter Olympics was about a propaganda exercise to make the regime look good in the eyes of the world.
The Beijing Olympics were controversial even before they began, and critics say they've shown the Chinese government for what it really is.
The world's greatest athletic showcase. But just outside the show, rape, genocide, slave labor.
NBC rejected this ad intended to run during the Olympics, ordering the names of the Olympic corporate sponsors blurred out.
We wanted to call out the American companies that are funding it all. it is just shameful and disgusting that American companies are turning a blind eye and funding this.
The spot also included NBA star Enes Kanter Freedom.
Stand for freedom, defund the dictators. When you see made in China,
put it down.
The Turkish Kanter Freedom, long a critic of both China and the NBA, had his name changed so that freedom would be displayed on his basketball jersey. But his NBA career could now be over after the Boston Celtics traded him last week to the Houston Rockets, who then put him on waivers. Some claim the NBA caved to pressure from China. While there have been comparisons to the 1936 Olympic Games held in Nazi Germany, Stephen Mosier, author of the new expanded Bully of Asia, says these games are worse.
It's worse because we didn't know much about the concentration camps then. The persecution, the genocide of the Jews had not yet begun in earnest. But we know that there is genocide in real time against the 12 million Uyghurs in the far west of China. We know that the heads of household have been arrested and sent to concentration camps, not to mention that they, along with other dissidents, are being cut up and literally having their organs harvested and sold.
In 1936, the world not only went to Berlin, but offered the Nazi salute. This time, the U.S. and other nations chose to only declare so-called diplomatic boycotts of the Games. The world still showed up. The Games were held, and communist leaders were able to bask in their moment on the world stage. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Up next, digging up history and healing old wounds. How recovering America's oldest black church is bringing black and white Christians together. Here in the U.S., archaeologists in Williamsburg, Virginia, are uncovering the oldest black church in America, dating back to colonial times. The rich history of First Baptist Church is now the subject of a documentary. The producers say tells the whole story, not just half the story. Wendy Griffith explains.
Ringing a bell from the First Baptist Church in Virginia, one of the oldest black churches in America, founded under a grove of trees in 1776.
It's a story 245 years in the making. The story of black Americans, free and slaves, gathering in secret to pray and worship together.
It was a time when they weren't supposed to be worshiping together. That was a big risk, and they took that risk to fulfill their faith.
Producers say the documentary, History Half Told is Untold, tells the amazing story of how white colonist Jesse Cole gave black enslaved preacher Moses a small 16 by 20 foot carriage house for worship.
Sit down, sit down and take your rest.
The story coming out of Bruton Parish is that Jesse Cole's wife loved the worship service that the blacks did so much. She would come home and open her window and enjoy the songs and the service. And the good thing about this is we found the descendants of that family, and the story is the same. So the parallel history integrates, and that's what we're trying to do with this film.
After a tornado destroyed it, a second church built on the site in 1856 stood for 100 years. The rich history of First Baptist, however, was literally covered up when the city put a parking lot over the land and paid for a new church building a few blocks away. Thanks to efforts by Colonial Williamsburg and the Let Freedom Ring Foundation, archaeologists began uncovering the history, and Harshaw says that is bringing healing.
You have some descendants right now that are still living that saw this process, this church at 1856 structure being knocked down and covered up with an asphalt parking lot. They're now getting to ride by and see it being uncovered.
And that's helping bring the community, black and white, together.
I want people to feel that healing can happen, that togetherness, it can happen. All of the things that we thought could not happen, all we have to do is come together and recognize each other's humanity and that we all serve the same God.
The goal is to reconstruct the 1818 church right here on the site of where archaeologists discovered the remnants of the original meeting house, which eventually became known as First Baptist Church.
It was probably a very lightly built structure, wooden siding that comes up from a brick foundation. We uncovered that several months ago, and it will not survive long being exposed to the elements like we're experiencing today. So we are backfilling it right now, and it will stay covered for the time being. And the hope and the expectation is that we will be able to rebuild that once the whole project is finished.
Important discoveries so far include a 1-cent coin dating back to 1817, copper pins common on women's clothing at the time, and about 30 grave sites. The dig is scheduled to continue through this year. Then work will begin on a reconstructed church. The goal, to open doors to the public by the fall of 2026, in time for the First Baptist 250th anniversary celebration. Wendy Griffith, CBN News, Williamsburg.
And you can see the documentary History Half Told is Untold, February 25th through the 27th at 8 p.m. on the CBN News Channel. We'll be right back. Finally this week, a historic journey in the Middle East, as Naftali Bennett became the first Israeli prime minister to publicly visit the Gulf Arab state of Bahrain. The trip cementing ties between the new allies is a clear message of cooperation aimed at regional arch-rival Iran. Bennett's visit comes less than 2 weeks after the country signed a defense agreement with an eye on rising tensions in the Gulf. Bennett praised the Abraham Accords peace agreements. Those were brokered under the Trump administration.
We are so excited with the Abraham Accords. This is what the relationship should really be about between Arabs and Jews.
Israel and its new Gulf allies are watching closely as diplomats are currently negotiating with Iran over its nuclear program. Well, thanks for joining us. That's our show for this week. Until next week, keep praying for George Thomas. We appreciate all your prayers here at CWN. For all of us at CBN News, goodbye and God bless you.